Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, June 8, 2017. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, not inside our New York City studio. As you can see, both Luke Thomas and I are not there. We are in our respective homes. For various reasons, we couldn't do the show out of the studio. But as you know, a ton going on these days in the world of mixed martial arts, so we did not want to leave you hanging. Jeff and Chuck couldn't do the show this week, but because there's so much going on, I have no doubt that we will fill up the regular hour of the Beat. So let us not waste any time. Of course, you know Luke of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. Luke, how are you?
I'm doing quite well, Ariel. This is your idea. It's a good one. I think it'll work. If it doesn't, I'm just going to blame you anyway.
100%. I'll take that blame. There's so much, like I said, so much. It's no different than every other week. And because actually we're going to be missing a couple of weeks in the near future, I didn't want to leave the people hanging. I care about the people. So let us get right into it. Let's go into the show. Demetrious Johnson, by now, you've probably at least read his statement that he put out Monday morning. You may have even heard him on the MMA Hour. There is a lot to unpack here, but first, let me ask you this. Here we are Thursday morning, 72 hours or so removed from him coming out and putting out some stuff that we did not expect from Demetrious Johnson, to put it mildly. Are you surprised that the UFC has not responded to this in any way, shape, or form? A statement, an interview, something like that. I reached out to them on Monday. They said they'll get back to me. Nothing has happened. Does this surprise you, considering all that he said?
It really does, to be honest. Even some kind of mild comment, I thought they would have given look, we value our champion and we look forward to working with him, something. But just the radio silence about it, or at least the declining to comment, I found, I don't know, like, it's weird, because if someone comes out and says what they say, and I think most people were inclined to at least believe all or some of what DJ said, not everyone, but there seemed to be, I think it's fair to say, a strong degree of sympathy, right? If they go out and they say these things, and these are particularly serious charges, right, where someone is showing not illegal behavior in any stretch of the imagination, but super strong-arm bully tactics, and you don't challenge that in any way with a separate narrative, you just let that go into the ether and let it fester and sit. And I'm not here to say that the UFC has just as much to contribute to this situation positively, and they need to get their message out there. I'm just saying, from a messaging standpoint, they're just allowing him to dictate all of the public narrative here. And again, I do think he probably makes some great points, so I think he will ultimately dictate how this is remembered. Now, in the end, I think what they're probably banking on is it doesn't matter what he says in public. What ultimately matters is what kind of contract or deal we come up with, and that will be the true testament, the monument to all of this. And maybe that's true, but just to let him go out there, and for a guy who is basically a Boy Scout, to go out there and make very serious charges about how he's been mistreated and bullied and borderline harassed, and no comment in response. I mean, I can't be alone here, man. That was, I think, very unusual.
Why do you think this is? I mean, I'm actually reminded of something Dana White said on the UFC Unfiltered podcast last week. They were talking about the Ally Quinta situation, and he said, look, 10 years ago, I'm all over this. I'm blowing up. I'm responding. I'm coming back. The gloves are off. But I'm older now, a lot richer now. It maybe just doesn't affect him the same way. Do you feel like this is another one of those cases? And you also have to consider the fact that, I mean, like you just said, Demetrious isn't one of those guys who's been complaining for the past 5 years. So does it just seem like the UFC is not willing to fight these battles anymore? And if so, because we all know that Dana White is the guy who usually puts out the message, they don't like when a matchmaker speaks or a PR person goes on the record. Is it wrong to have this approach to let the fighters set the narrative, and then the media goes with that because we have nothing else to go by, right?
Yeah, but that's fair enough. But the Iaquinta situation, to me, I mean, maybe you feel differently, but to me it feels fundamentally different. This is a guy who very, very talented, I think hilarious, and an important member of that lightweight community, but not the champion, not like the guy. I mean, Dana White, you can accuse him of not promoting Demetrious Johnson all that well, but if you want to say anything positive about him and what he's done about Demetrious, of late, they have gone out of their way to say not only is, of course, the flyweight champ, that's a fact, but to say this guy might be the pound-for-pound best in the sport and maybe one of the best ever. Right? They've gone out of their way to say that. To not challenge some of the things he says, I think a little bit weird. Now, there is maybe one counter-argument to that being, maybe if Ronda had come out or Conor had come out and said, I can't work with this person, that would have been all over SportsCenter. This wasn't. This was not all over SportsCenter. Certainly a big part of our world, but it didn't reach that next level. And really, as you know, Dana White doesn't go on MMA Hour anymore that I'm aware of, or certainly doesn't come on my radio show. And he had in the past when I had a smaller radio show. He goes on the national shows that ask him real softballs, the Colin Cowards, or I'm not saying they're all bad shows, but they're just casual fans who appeal to a casual audience. They ask him casual type questions. If their audience cares about it, maybe he would speak out, but maybe he doesn't because of that. I still think, though, get back to the previous point, what really concerns me is that you've got this malaise affecting other fighters and this contagion affecting other fighters. Who else might this encourage to speak out in a way that they had not anticipated, that they maybe wouldn't expect to? And what kind of damage over time could not challenging these kinds of things cause down the road?
Eventually, do you expect them to say something? Or is it just one of those cases where there's another press conference or scrum and then he says it? In other words, do you expect them to proactively come out and respond to this? Or is it just at the next event, he'll say something and then we'll kind of move on?
That's a tough one. Because I can imagine him going on some other radio show for, whatever purpose. And then someone, doing their homework, some research intern doing their homework, and him getting asked about it and then making comments about it in some kind of incredibly incendiary way. Because I don't think he's going to back down, I think people are like, oh, Dana will surely back down this time. Really? This time? I don't buy that at all. So I expect that. Or, look, at the end of the day, he's a businessman. He wants to make deals, right? The guy spoke for Trump at the RNC. They're all about these deals. If they make a deal, I guarantee they'll just be like, it's water under the bridge. But I think you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube on this one, Ariel. Surely you agree with me, and I mean this. We have heard stories like this over time for a long time, but then you go and you try to get someone on the record, a coach, the fighter themselves, and they're just, nope, don't want to talk, certainly not on the record in any kind of way. And so it makes reporting a lot of this stuff kind of hard. DJ going out there and saying this stuff, especially if the deal is, okay, maybe he ends up fighting TJ, but he gets more money or some other kind of concession. I think this is going to inspire, and I use those words, other fighters, especially elite ones, to do this kind of thing. So speak in the media, don't speak in the media. To me, the milk's already spilled here a little bit.
I actually said that at the top of the show on Monday because I've had many conversations with Demetrious as he's gone from being just a champion to one of the most dominant champions in UFC history. And he's a guy who's very accessible. I even noted after his win over Wilson Hayes, this is a guy who has not changed one iota since becoming a champion. And what I mean by that is same manager, same coaches, same crew. I mean, he doesn't even have any kind of entourage whatsoever, no PR person, none of that. And along the way, he's gotten more comfortable with the media. But when you talk to him off the record, person to person, he's a lot different than the guy who's talking in interviews. And what I mean by that is, and we're seeing that more, like he drops F-bombs. He actually has somewhat of a potty mouth, but he has complained about certain things. And I've asked him, why don't you say this? Why don't you bring this up? I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not that kind of champion. He's always been the quintessential company man. And so for him to get to this point, think about just how upset he must be to get to this point to actually unload this kind of statement with these kinds of words. So then let me ask you this about the actual meat and potatoes of this, because I kind of feel like a lot of people in MMA media, fans, have been sort of missing his point. We're sitting here debating, should he fight TJ Dillashaw? Should he fight Ray Borg? What should he do for his record-breaking win? Should he be, getting more money? I feel like at the end of the day, all he's really talking about is respect. I feel like if the UFC would have come to him with this idea at the very beginning and said, look, this is what we want to do. We want to do it in Seattle. We want to make a big deal. I actually feel like he would have been open to it. The idea that DJ is so beholden to the rankings is actually wrong because, look, he fought the tough winner. That guy wasn't the number one contender in December, right? I mean, Wilson Hayes should have been the guy he fought for and said, this is the guy you promised, fight him in Atlanta, all this stuff and more. I think he just wants respect, and I feel like as he said, when Dana White said to him, "This is what TJ wants," he's like, "Whoa, whoa, what TJ wants? What about what I want?"
Mm.
And then that kind of, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Do you disagree with me? Do you feel like this is an issue of him not wanting to fight TJ Dillashaw because he's not the number one contender, or do you think that this is just a relationship thing and he now feels disrespected, so he's going to put his foot down once and for all?
Yeah, I'm mostly with you, I think. Mostly. And here's what I mean. If you look at the set of things he said, and you look at some of the demands, I want to give credit to Todd Martin over Sherdog. He took a lot of heat for, I don't agree with everything Todd said either, but namely that there is a case to be made that some of the things Demetrious said were totally reasonable, and then some things don't quite hold up to rational scrutiny. But to me, I think that's a fair point, but I'm with you, which is
Like
to
what,
say,
by the way, for those that missed his points, what do you mean? What don't hold up? Can you give us an example or two?
So an example, and then this is sort of Todd's argument, so if I'm aping this incorrectly, it's my fault. But let's sort of take, let's say, how about that, number one, if you're saying something like, I want all of TJ's purse if he misses weight, this is not negotiation. This is you stalling negotiation by making a demand so outrageous no one would buy it. The other one being that, it's unfair that if TJ drops out, having Ray Borg on the card as a backup, that's just not professionalism. His version of that is that's actually the most professional thing you can do, right? You keep the card alive, you keep the fight alive, you keep the fans entertained and everything moving by having a substitute, and you know well in advance that's the case. It would actually be unprofessional to not have that, or to say that you sort of care about the rankings, but before the Borg fight came along, and that matters to you, but then you ask for Sergio Pettis, who's below Borg in the rankings. So some of these things are a little bit confused rationally, but I actually take your side, and I think DJ's side to a large extent, which is to say, the real message I got from the whole thing was that this is a guy who said, you know what, I'm not even going to worry about pay-per-view points. You don't have to pay me that way. You can just pay me up front. And yes, he's been the beneficiary of being a lot of shows on Fox, but he always shows up. He never misses weight. Does anybody really think that USADA's ever going to have an issue with this guy? Nothing. Model citizen to the fullest extent. And no, maybe not model citizen in the way where he's going out there and promoting himself to the greatest degree, but he's doing everything contractually asked of him and then some. When it comes time for him to cash in at a very important juncture, i.e., he's about to break the all-time record for title defenses, and now all of this is being thrust on him as if he's some rookie who just joined the show. It just doesn't sit well with them. It really, really, really feels like all that equity, all those savings I put in, they're just for nothing. What is the point of being compliant early if I'm going to be bullied later, right? They always want to do the right thing up front to be able to cash out at a later date. That seems entirely rational to me. And this was the point I made, I think, on my live chat. It's like, even if, first of all, let's be clear about this. They make money off Demetrious Johnson. They don't make as much as they do off, I don't know, a Diaz or a McGregor, but they're not losing cash on him. And to me, the real value of Demetrious Johnson is that the guy you look at as your ATM internally? No. But he is a prestige asset. He literally is arguably the best fighter alive right now. That's the guy you can parade around. That's the guy that makes your organization look better, because if the best guy in the world fights in your organization, geez, your organization must be pretty great. And I think for him to make some demands, even if a little bit irrational, especially in the way in which those demands are made, this situation, I think, really, really, really could have been avoided. But it should be noted, I and this is the last point about this, these guys have got to stop operating this way. They've got to stop operating like, I'm just going to rely on UFC's goodwill. Tony Ferguson going out there, Khabib doesn't make weight. They pay him $100K, which is generous. They didn't have to pay him jack because there was nothing in his contract about that. These fighters, and especially these managers, they need to start taking a look at these contracts where you get guarantees so they can't come to you in some kind of way that is totally out of bounds.
Here, you just emphasized the word manager. Demetrious Johnson's manager is also his head coach, Matt Hume, who he called a father figure. Matt is one of the very best coaches in the game. There's no denying that. But, by trade, he is not your manager. He is not Adi Attar. He's not Malki Kawa. These names that we hear. There's a handful or so, Brian Butler, the guys with the large stables. Is DJ doing a disservice to himself by being so loyal to Matt? Not saying kick Matt out. I mean, his relationship with Matt and Brad, I mean, that works clearly. You even hear Conor McGregor going out of his way and praising their relationship. But should he now look at the situation and say, maybe it's time that I get a management team behind me, that I don't do the negotiations, via my coach? Do you feel like this could have been avoided had he, he prides himself on being that sort of no-frills kind of guy, but is it time that he changes that?
I don't want to speak out of turn. Without knowing the actual specifics, it's hard to say. You might say, well, Luke, didn't you just make this criticism? I did. But that could apply to just about every single manager out there. Matt Hume is hardly alone in having guys sign off on contracts where down the road, yeah, there might be escalating pay, but there are none of these other guarantees about if a guy misses weight or if you want to have me in someone's hometown or whatever the case, whatever matters to these guys, that thing is going to be important later. Frankly, no one in the space is very good at this. Because I think Conor and Tony have the exact same manager. I think there's just this general practice of signing these contracts without thinking about what could happen long term, what kind of guarantees do we want, what really matters to us. I think there's a lot of focus on, okay, what's going to be my show and win money. And I'm not saying that's not unimportant, but as we can see, there are contingencies down the road where you're going to be wanting some protections that are going to matter to you pretty strongly.
How about the notion that he hasn't been marketed enough? He hasn't been promoted enough. Do you believe that? Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think that's unfair?
So this is another one where I thought Todd made a really good point. I would say yes and no. And maybe you disagree, because I think there's a variety of opinion here. On the one hand, have they understood who DJ was, and have they fully pushed him with a media or marketing campaign? I mean, the answer is quite clearly no. I don't know how you could possibly argue otherwise. If you've got the best fighter alive and there is some kind of issue about his visibility or likability, there are things you can do to mitigate this, right? And I mentioned before, when you hear other fighters, so who's getting, sorry, my chair's falling, who's getting inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, right? Kazushi Sakuraba. What really struck me the night that was announced was you should just see fighters talk about Kazushi Sakuraba. It's like they're talking about the Dalai Lama, for crying out loud. It's insane reverence, right? I'm not saying that DJ gets the exact same kind of thing, but he gets pretty close. Like, they talk about him, and it's ridiculous. They're just in awe. And having some kind of show made about the best fighter alive, if you really want to market this guy, if you really want to push him, if you want to make him feel as special as he actually might be, have they done that? No. Like, they definitely haven't. However, there's another argument to be made that it's like, look, how many shows on Fox, at Big Fox, has he headlined? 4, 5? How many pay-per-views has he been a part of? Not an insignificant amount, even if he wasn't headlining, or especially when he wasn't headlining. He was, with John Jones or other big shows. If you had given, to the point that was previously made, Ioane and Jacek 4 or 5 shows on Fox, how much more popular would she be? Boy, she might be pretty popular, It's not like she's been on small shows, but the point being is, have they buried this guy on Facebook prelims forever? No, I don't think that they have. They have put him in big slots for exposure. I think this gets back to the same thing for me, man, as the Diaz situation. They've got guys in there that they're good about giving a stage to someone who commands it. They're good about promoting people to these mainstream audiences in a way they feel like mainstream audiences should see fighters, like Ronda. But when you get a guy like Diaz who has high times high-fiving him, or you got Demetrious Johnson playing video games, they don't know how to access those audiences as well. They may not even want to access them in the case of the Diaz version. And it cripples them as promoters when, in fact, they're actually pretty good promoters. So I think it's two problems. Yes, they've given him exposure, but they've never really understood him, and they've never made that special push for a guy who is as special as I think he is.
I actually think that DJ in the last couple of years has done a nice job of promoting himself via video game audience, the Twitch stuff and all that and more. I think the real lesson here is if you are relying on the UFC to market you, about you, you're going to be waiting a long time. Let's look at the biggest draws over the past 5 years. They all kind of did it themselves. And then at the end, the UFC kind of hitched their wagon. Conor did it himself. Ronda did it herself. Even look at the guys right now who are doing this himself. The UFC is not telling him, go out and act a fool. Mike Perry, people are gravitating towards him, not because of anything the UFC did. he's doing it himself. Even like a Marlon Moraes, who they were served on this silver platter. I mean, what did they do to tell the audience last week that this guy is one of the best bantamweights in the world who is kicking butt? Nothing. I mean, nothing. People were excited that there was some, World Series of Fighting footage, right before the break, before he fought on Saturday night. That was it. There was no packages put out. So you can't wait for them anymore. There's too many fights. We started promoting Derek Lewis and Mark Hunt on Monday. You know what I mean? Because there's 11 fights in 11 weeks going on right now. We're in the midst of it. So, if you're Justin Gaethje, you can't be waiting for them to promote you for your fight on July 7th. If you're Michael Johnson, if you're Valentina Shevchenko, yeah, they're going to do their countdown show, but that's not going to move the needle. You have to actually go out there and do it yourself. He's tried, and you'd like to see them, again, hitch their wagon, put him out there in front of the video game media, get him out there in front of the right people. I mean, I'm not a big video game guy, but I know that it's a massive business right now with e-games and all that. Get him involved somehow. Get him on one of these teams. I don't know what you could do, but there are ways, I think, to attract a certain kind of audience to Demetrious Johnson. So, okay, let me ask you about this now. TJ Dillashaw part of this whole story is the one that actually kind of irks me the most. I understand where Demetrious is coming from. I understand where the UFC is coming from. It makes total sense for me that on August 19th in Seattle, they want to put on the best fight possible, especially new ownership, rankings be damned, future be damned. What's the best fight possible we could put on? It's obviously TJ. He's a bigger name than Ray Borg. I get where DJ is coming from, the respect thing, trying to stay true to the division. I get it. The TJ part actually baffles me to a certain degree. And maybe baffle isn't the right word because I shouldn't be surprised. But when you consider the fact that 6 months ago, this guy was standing in line with Bjorn Rebney and company wearing that T-shirt and talking about fighter rights and complaining about essentially the same thing that he is doing to Ray Borg here, complaining that he was getting passed over on the microphone after beating John Lineker, saying, if I don't get a title shot, this stuff is rigged. And now, fighter rights be damned, unity be damned. You're now going out there and getting your own, and showing essentially no compassion for the likes of Ray Borg or what DJ is saying. What DJ is saying is something that will happen to TJ, that will happen to every great fighter. And minutes after, he talks on my show, TJ's coming out with the Minnie Mouse shtick, calling him scared, calling him the B word, all that stuff. Do you not get, this is exactly what you were complaining about 6 months ago. To me, of the three parties involved, Demetrious Johnson, UFC, TJ Dillashaw, and I have a lot of respect for TJ, and he's been through a lot over the last couple of years, a lot of drama. I'm surprised that he is going this route. It comes across as hypocritical, to be honest, to me.
Oh,
to be honest with you.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. Well, I'll say this. If you had to ask me, do I think that TJ cares about the things he said he cared about when he spoke on that stage, I do think those things are true, but it just tells you that there is a reason to believe that whoever assembled that meeting with him and everyone else at the Double M Triple A, it feels to me like they used him like a prop. That's what it feels like to me. I'm not again. I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying TJ's like F fighter rights. I don't get that vibe. But here's what I do think. And Kevin Iole had a similar article in Yahoo today, a little bit different, but semi-same point, where to me, what I don't think fighters are ever going to get away from a scenario where if they're trying to get a fight with another guy and another guy is, for whatever reason, and I'm not here to comment on DJ's motivations and he has explained them, but as it stands, he basically doesn't want to fight with TJ, or at least not under many of the circumstances presented. Whenever you get a fighter in a scenario like that, they're always going to battle and squabble and call each other names. I think that's inevitable. But in the absence of a larger framework by which that person, in this case DJ, can settle his grievances with the UFC, it looks like TJ is joining forces with the UFC for reasons that DJ is outlining as part of the bullying. In other words, I think TJ is just trying to get a fight. I don't think he thinks of himself as some kind of accomplice to the undermining of rights. I think he's just trying to say, hey, look, man, this would be good for you, it'd be good for me, it'd be good for everyone, let's do this. But instead, what it winds up looking like is that he and the UFC are working in concert to bully their best fighter into actions he doesn't want to take. So without this larger agreement between fighters and the UFC, whether it's a CBA or something else that has a grievance process, what ends up happening is a fighter's desire to get a bout and a grievance process on the other side, they come into direct conflict. And there's no real way to separate the two. In fact, whether or not TJ is trying to look like that, I think he kind of ends up looking like that. Like he's like, I'll be the henchman, I'll be the shakedown guy for the UFC to get something out of you. And so I'm not here to say that he doesn't care about the rights of fighters, but it doesn't look great. Right.
This was the time. This was the time. I mean, it almost comes across like if you come out and say, "Look, I've been there before. I sympathize." You come out with some sort of heartfelt response. I get it, but to go with the name calling, scared, and the Minnie Mouse, it comes across as very sophomoric. And you even have a guy like Henry Cejudo, who was one who stood up for
that was worse. That was
and
worse.
He's like, hey, DJ, get out of the way. I'll fight TJ Dillashaw. UFC, make the flyweights great again. Now, there were a couple flyweights. There was even Ben Wen, who's fighting this weekend in Auckland, who came out and said, it's about time someone spoke up. There were a couple that actually sided with DJ. But to me, 6 months after, to throw out this rhetoric, I mean, the same thing is going to happen to you. And this would have been a nice time to sort of band together. And it's I don't want to say it's disappointing, but of the three parties involved, I was actually really surprised that he went with that route. And then if you go back to me, like the big lesson in all this, we were all on that association train. We all kind of believe that the fighters need this. I am more convinced now than ever that it's not happening at least anytime soon. I mean, there's just been so many examples over the past 6 or 7 months, this being the most alarming in my opinion because it involves one of the guys who was a part of that picture, and I know the GSP situation as well. That one was alarming too. Every single fighter that you've asked since that press conference, dating back to Cerrone, literally days later, all backtracked. I don't really know about this MMA. Like, what was that? Like, how did you get to that point? And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but you got to the point to make this seminal announcement and align yourself with someone like Bjorn and take the pictures and put on the press conference, and then literally walking out of the door, you all had second thoughts? How does that happen? It's and people involved. It's shocking. Like, what happened between that press conference and the moments after that made them all rethink it to now it's essentially, a dead idea. And so to hear TJ talk about this when he was literally going on the mic, and I gave him so much credit for that, saying, look, if I don't get a title shot next, this is rigged.
Right.
I need to. And now it just kind of baffles my mind that we're at this point where he's, it appears like he's kind of, as you mentioned, siding with the UFC to put pressure on this one guy to take the fight.
And even Max Holloway after winning, don't go out there crying for your title shot. Don't go out there. Don't essentially trying to police everyone about, guys who feel like they're owed something and not getting it. There's this weird, you see this a little bit, I swear to God, this is true. You see this a little bit in the American military, from my experience anyway. This culture of Horatio Alger up from the bootstraps, I can get it done by myself. And these are guys who believe that because, one, you have to succeed in this world, or at least the world that they're in. And two, that if you make a life about self-reliance and responsibility, like anything, if you practice it, you get better at it. And so they really believe that that's the way to go. In other words, there is this ingrained mental culture that they have, partly by necessity, that not only am I not going to worry about you, I'm going to worry about me. That's one problem. The other problem is I'm going to take your complaints about institutional unfairness as unserious because you don't have what it takes up here. That really is the obstacle, because when you see guys out there like Nate Diaz, who will be your advocate for the idea that, like, if I ask Nate Diaz, hey, Nate, is it fair if the UFC signs a new television deal for $400 million a year and the fighters don't get half? He intuitively knows this is deeply unfair, right? But what's the solution from Nate Diaz to Max Holloway to Henry Cejudo? What's the common denominator? The common denominator is, okay, that's unfair. I can recognize that. Here's the solution. I'm going to get mine. I don't really care what happens to the rest of you. I'm going to do what I have to do to take care of myself because I'm self-reliant, I'm self-motivated, and I can fix this for myself. But if y'all don't get what you want, something must be wrong with you. I think that's the sickness that they have to fix.
Yeah, another example that came to mind was, and I know it's not apples to apples, but you may recall when Phil Jackson came out and essentially bashed Carmelo Anthony in the press.
Your favorite.
All of Carmelo's friends and colleagues all sided with him publicly. You didn't see any player go, "Yo, Phil, get rid of Carmelo, sign me, I'll make the Knicks great again," right? But that's essentially what you're seeing here, right? There has to be some kind of unity amongst these fighters. Until that happens, I don't see any kind of association happening. It's just another example that occurred this week. So let me ask you this: if you're the UFC, what do you do now? You want to make this fight. You're at a standstill, essentially. What do? How do you get this done?
Well, like I mentioned before, the part about giving here's the thing I really didn't like about him saying DJ about him saying just give me TJ's purse if he fails to make weight. Like, I completely understand his point about this guy's never made weight. This guy didn't even wrestle at this weight, much less make weight as a fighter. That's a big problem. And also, there's just this inconvenient issue where, at least in California, they're licensing people medically, right? So if you get your license to fight at a certain weight class, is it really even healthy for him to go to 125 and then all the other contender issues? I really didn't like him saying, at first I thought, oh, this is a great idea. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, this is terrible that he's asking for his entire purse because and TJ was like, sure, I'll do it. Another thing, don't do that. Because do we really want to get to a scenario where it becomes an expected practice that the guy who doesn't make weight gives up his entire purse? I can imagine a number of real-world problems that would cause. This is not something we want to give a lot of oxygen to. If I'm DJ, this is to me very simple. You either say, okay, we go back to the Ray Borg scenario, or you can say what Daniel Cormier offered him on UFC Tonight last night, which is, guys, if you really want DJ to take this fight, pay him. Pay him a ton of cash. And the question is whether it's worth it to them to do that. I think DJ should be amenable to some kind of changes. I mean, look, you got to make a deal. Both sides have to get some of their interests represented here. I believe that DJ, if he really wants to, should not budge from the Ray Borg thing. But if he wants to be, slightly open to his employer's interests, finding a better way to make the TJ fight than saying I'll just take his purse if he fails to make weight, being open to some more suggestions, and the UFC being a little more willing to cut a check, I think all of these things could solve this issue.
All right, well, it's developing. I'm sure we'll talk about it again soon. Let's move along. Let's talk about Max Holloway. A few days ago, he defeated Jose Aldo to become the UFC featherweight champion. And one thing I wanted to ask you right off the top was, after seeing his homecoming, those amazing scenes in Hawaii, him landing, the airport, the people there, I thought the UFC did a great job of alerting the media and fans what time both Holloway and Yancy Medeiros were going to land to make this into a big deal. Him coming home to Waianae and the people on the street waiting for him as he pulled up. Is it possible that 25-year-old Max Holloway, winner of 11 in a row at this point, and he's beaten a lot of great guys to get to this point, and now, of course, the featherweight champion, is it possible that he could one day be more popular than the great BJ Penn, and is that day coming soon?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that question. That's a crazy question. Well, let me just say something. I was surprised the UFC hasn't done this more often. In boxing, it is common for the promoter to alert fans when the fighter is coming to an airport, including fighters as big as Pacquiao. They call it the greet so-and-so party at the airport. And they let you know what flight they're on and when they're landing and everything. It's a very common thing. I'm glad the UFC is finally doing it, especially for a guy like Max or let's say Stipe Miocic, where maybe their national profile is in transition, but their local profile is pretty big. And so you can make a big impact that way. So I was really, really pleased to see that, and it's another step in the right direction. Boy, can he be bigger than BJ Penn? I don't know, because BJ came up in this formative age of MMA. Remember, of course, he had that background as the first black belt, the American black belt to win the Mundials. And so he just took UFC by storm at this amazing point in time. Max has more work to do. But you could, man, could you already make the case that Max is better now than BJ ever was in terms of just overall measurement of talent? You could maybe argue that. I think this, in the modern context, it's a little bit more difficult to achieve because you're not part of this. I mean, if they wanted to, they could put BJ almost in the pioneer wing, right? They could kind of almost get away with that. They obviously Max would not be eligible for something like that to really be an achiever. But I guess what I would say is, if he can keep going and then jump a weight class and also get another belt, remember BJ has a belt in 2 different weight classes, which, by the way, I think is very, very possible. I think Max Holloway is one of the best fighters in the UFC, period, independent of weight class. But what I would say is, to really take over a legend's name like BJ Penn, there would have to be an extraordinary degree of achievement that I don't think he's yet gotten. And will he? I mean, who knows?
Could help if they do an event in Hawaii. I feel like that would only make his legend grow, right?
Yeah,
to put him there.
I mean, my understanding for folks who may not know, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, my understanding is they can put an event anywhere at this point, right? With Fight Pass, and
sure,
it doesn't even matter. But the title fight issue is the one that gets a little thorny, because I guess the time zone issue, there'd be a taxation issue, and there's an arena issue. I guess they could go to Blaisdell, but apparently they have some hesitancy to do that. That's why they won't go to Hawaii. But I'm like, if you can go to, Uberlandia, Brazil. I mean, I thought this was a made-up name, and I really did. I mean, forgive my ignorance, but geez, I'd never heard of this place. Then why can't you go to? I mean, you would think Hawaii would have. Marshall Zelaznik told me that in going to Brazil and in places that didn't necessarily have the most up-to-date infrastructure with Fight Pass, they were eventually able to figure out ways to show fights from those locations. Sorry to ramble here, but if they can, and he said that's why now we can go to South Korea and all these other places that may have venues that aren't quite up to date. If that's the case, why can't you go to Blaisdell for a Fight Pass show? Whether or not Max Holloway fights on it is a bit of a different issue.
Yeah, you obviously on paper you say it makes a lot of sense, but there are these logistics. I was talking to a promoter yesterday who's done shows in Hawaii, and he said that it's just really hard to make money. And as you mentioned, money over there. One of the issues is if you do a 10 p.m. East Coast start time main card, that's for in Hawaii, and then with the prelims and all of that, it's hard to get people to sit in an arena for that long, given those times. Now, one of the big things that has come up, of course, since Max won, who does he fight next? It's a 2-horse race, and I have to say, it is a bit of a breath of fresh air to just hear him say, like, I'm fighting anyone in my division. I want to stay here. I'm not jumping up 5 super fights. He's just here to be the king of the featherweights, and that's kind of nice. It's Frankie Edgar or Cub Swanson. Who would you pick?
Well, Cub Swanson's point that Frankie has lost in all these title fights is not without merit. I think there is something to be said for that. But that also being said, I give it to Frankie. Frankie and Max have not fought before. Cub and Max have. It went Max's way pretty clearly, pretty handily. The Frankie fight, I think, is interesting because people believe, rightly or wrongly, that what is the value of a Frankie Edgar fight? Well, one, you could say meritocratically he's number one, so he just is the guy. But more importantly, there's some intrigue there. Hey, Frankie Edgar, we've seen if he can take you down, he can pass guard, he can submit you, he can at least bang you out on top. I mean, there's lots of things he can do. He's got a lot of skills. Plus, we know he's strong on the feet. He's extremely durable, hard to put away. Boy, and great cardio. This seems like a fantastic fight. That one feels like the most compelling for a number of reasons. I am sympathetic to what Cub Swanson is saying. He's sort of saying, how this movie is going to end. And to that point, I do favor Max Holloway to win, basically anyway. Dude, I'm telling you, I think Max Holloway's future, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I really believe it's going to be at 155 and whether or not he can contend for a title up there. And I think eventually he will. But at featherweight, for me, maybe you disagree, I think that Frankie Edgar fight could be tremendous.
Did you expect this from Max? Like when you saw, he started his UFC career 3-3, and I know he came in as a 19-year-old, so it's kind of hard to tell. But like there are some fighters, I feel like when you see them, yes, Daniel Cormier was older, but you saw him, you're like, this guy's gonna be a guy. Cain Velasquez, this guy's gonna be a guy. When Conor came to the UFC, he felt like a star already. Did you expect this from Max? Like, I didn't think that he would be a champion. I have to admit, I'm blown away. I'm in awe still of what he did on Saturday night. I'm in awe of the run. You look at the fighters that Cub and Stevens and the Lamas fight, and of course Pettis finishing him, and now Aldo. Just this last 2 years, this run, the back end of the run, is nothing short of amazing. But I have to admit, I have no problem saying I did not expect this out of him. Did you?
Not when I first saw him. No. I mean, I think I eventually took the red pill. Certainly after the Cup Swanson fight, I was like, okay, this
Yeah,
is
that was the big one.
I was like, whoa, And then, of course, in the Lamas fight. And, let's talk about it for real. 11-fight win streak, 2 of which are at the championship level. And the 11th one is against an all-time great. I mean, this is shocking. And I know everyone was, and I said this point on my live chat yesterday, I know everyone was like, well, Aldo won the first 2 rounds. No doubt, Aldo did not look terrible. But to me, my impression of this was that it was a spider building a web in the first round and really building a web in the second round and then finally being big enough in the third. In other words, to me, he was just always really in control, even if Aldo looked like the better fighter for certain moments. And that is just shocking. I also made this point. People don't realize this. He fought Aldo orthodox the whole fight with a little bit of stance switching in very small pockets in transition. He fought Lamas the whole time southpaw with the same thing, very little stance switching, like just 2% of the fight in certain moments. That's you're beating elite contenders and all-time greats in different stances. It's shocking. It's a shocking level of achievement that I don't think a lot of people really can even wrap their head around. I'll say this, and this is one reason why I think, number one, why I like this idea of the Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series, and two, why I mean that, and two, why I'm still not down on someone like Sage Northcutt. These guys at 20, 21, 22, they're almost newborns. They haven't quite figured anything out yet, and you can see from 20 to 25 the amount of progress. If I'm not saying everyone's going to be Max Holloway, but Max Holloway is proof that in that space, if someone has got a good start, a good foundation, and they're training like they're supposed to and making improvements, the amount of distance they can cover in that time is extraordinary. Now, he obviously is a bit of an outlier, but to answer your question, no, I didn't see it this way, but I don't think he's alone in the number of guys who are going to get to the UFC early, look a little slow, and then take off as they mature.
I want to also quickly add that I know this year the narrative has been it's a down year. Lorenzo Fertitta, made out what timing. I mean, I've said it himself and myself, and I believe it. However, I do feel like there is an interesting thing brewing for the new ownership, and in particular when it comes to new champions, relatively new. And I'm looking at Stipe Miocic, Tyron Woodley, Max Holloway, Cody Garbrandt. There's this new wave of champions coming in that I feel like, okay, right now they're not household names, but there is something to latch onto with these guys. Sometimes you get champions that there's just nothing there. I feel like there's kind of this new era coming in now, and Max is the latest example where I feel like, okay, there's this sort of, they're not all young. I know Garbrandt and Holloway are 25, the youngest champions in the UFC right now. And Miocic and Woodley aren't spring chickens, but they're certainly not, old guys walking around. I all of a sudden I'm starting to look at the future. And I'm like, I feel like there's something going on here. There's something to be excited about. Do you share that?
Excited about in what sense?
New faces, potentially new stars, new draws. Some guy. I think Holloway can be a draw. I really do. I think Cody can be a draw. I think Stipe can be a draw. I think if promoted the right way, Tyron Woodley could be a draw. Some guys, it's hard to sell. I get it. They don't give you much. But I feel like when I'm looking at these kind of 4 American champions, if you will, who've emerged over the past year, I think that there's something there.
I do think there's something there. Now, Woodley's a little bit of a different case. He's 35. I mean, he doesn't look it, but
yeah,
he's a little bit older.
Yeah.
But, I mean, God, when I was 30.
Not beat up, though, all that much. I mean, not a lot of injuries, but fair.
Right. No, fair. No. And again, he has a youthful energy about him, too, even though he's a mature one. But, I had a caller on my radio show once say something kind of interesting. He was Brazilian. And he said, I'm really worried about these guys like these Machitas and these Shoguns and these Anderson Silvas. And now you can add Jose Aldo to the list a little bit. Or, you just pick it. All these Brazilians, Wanderlei Silva. There was this crop of Brazilian stars that defined MMA as we know it, right? I mean, think about all the guys from the last 10 years who have made Brazilian MMA what it is. Or, frankly, forget that, MMA what it is. And now, to your point, I feel like there's this next crop, not merely in America, but internationally. I don't know how good Paulo Borrachinha is going to be. I guess we'll see. But to your point, there is this next crop of guys, and again, in that 20 to 25 range, where you're just not sure what's going to happen, but if you just give them a little time, a little bit of water, a little bit of sunlight, they turn into something pretty serious. And so I share your enthusiasm, especially in some of these lighter weight classes. We had left featherweight for dead, man. After I call it Hurricane McGregor had left, I've been saying it. This division is full of young guys. They need some time to get their bearings, no doubt about it. I'm not saying everyone has replaced everyone that left, but what I am saying is there's a lot to be excited about down the road. It is a down year, but I think maybe 2018, 2019, when some of these guys begin to really mature, you're going to get something pretty special.
Okay, here's another thing to be excited about. How about this? A lot more positivity from us this week. I reported earlier in the week there's a lot of enthusiasm surrounding Cris Cyborg versus Megan Anderson for the belt July 29th. All of a sudden, this thing has risen like a phoenix from the ashes, and it's back. I think Kat Zingano not being healthy has helped. I think obviously the Jermaine Durandamy situation has helped. But all of a sudden, it seems like after Invicta announced that Megan Anderson is fighting, the UFC was like, wait a second, this is a fight that we should do. I know you actually said, I believe last week on the program, maybe I'm daydreaming about this, that you didn't think that, this was the worst thing in the world. Am I wrong about that? Or am I thinking about someone else?
Week to week.
That they moved on. That they moved on from Megan.
I don't know. Week to week, I can't remember half the things I say. But maybe.
Okay, let's just say this. Do you like this now? Because I said on Monday I actually thought that Megan Anderson, thinking that the ship had sailed, came away looking like the biggest star in all of this, in the sense that she became a part of the Cyborg conversation. She showed a tremendous amount of courage stepping up, trying to push for the fight. She's now the face of Invicta. They're going to promote her as the main event, all that stuff. All's not lost for Megan Anderson, and let's be honest, she probably used a couple more fights to refine her skills. She was rocked by Charmaine Tweet in her last fight, but now it appears like she's very close to being thrown back into that deep end against the greatest of all time as far as featherweights are concerned. Do you like this? Is this the way to go, or should the UFC just try to do Cyborg versus another bloated bantamweight, especially considering the fact that she's staring at that October deadline? And she'll become a free agent if they don't re-sign her beforehand.
Yeah, this is a tougher one than it looks, because a lot can go wrong here. And man, you just think about like what could have been with Cyborg and UFC. I know we could talk about that a lot, but this scenario really illustrates it, because they could have done the Kat Zingano thing, but she can't quite get a license right now for different sort of health issues or medical issues or whatever you want to call them. I personally believe in a perfect world, Megan Anderson, this is way too early for her development. Is a loss to Cyborg the worst thing in the world? Maybe not. Maybe she takes a beating where it really badly affects her, and that would be a terrible thing. Or maybe she wins. That's certainly possible. I don't want to discount that. Or she loses in a way that it doesn't affect her, and then they can sort of keep her in rotation. I mean, to me, the issue was, and you've spoken to her a bunch of times, and so have I. She was supposed to fight Helena. I can't remember the last name at Invicta 25 that they had announced, or they had announced, but that they had, I guess, well, maybe it was announced. I don't remember, but
yeah,
okay. Well, point being is, my thought was, if you're just going to do that in Invicta, why can't you just do that in the UFC? So maybe they're doing this as a way to keep Cyborg there, to give her something to hang on to make future negotiation possible, to have some kind of, I don't know, working relationship. I don't think it's ideal for Megan. Maybe it's not the end of the world. I think it entirely depends on the outcome.
Okay. Do you think that the UFC should try to keep Cyborg on the roster, even though there is after Megan, there's really no one else? Is it worth keeping her on at this point?
I don't think they work well together.
Okay.
If they can find a way, independent of that, my concerns about it, to do it, then it doesn't really matter what I think. But they don't trust each other. They don't like each other. To me, it seems like they understand that there's value, obviously, in the UFC brand for Cyborg, and for the UFC having somebody who could headline shows and people recognize. But it's never worked. It's never, even when it did work, it didn't work like it was supposed to. It's very easy for me to get on the show and say they should just let her go. I don't have to worry about what Bellator does. I don't have to worry about what another promoter does. But I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say things like this has been a very damaged relationship from day one, and the continuous poisoning of the well that they both drink from has not helped matters at all since then.
let's see what happens. Certainly would be a nice addition for that particular card, especially in Anaheim where Cyborg currently lives. Now, this is a very straightforward question here. It's very simple. Yes or no. Should Bellator book Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz 3?
God, please no. Please no.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, I have no interest. Tito retired. And I spoke to Bellator officials after the fact. I was like, all right, is he really retired? Or are you all planning this, every time you go to a concert, the set ends and everyone's like, encore, encore.
Yeah.
I feel like the Bellator stint he had was an encore. And it went well for Tito. We've talked about that as well. And, look, here's the truth about it. We have seen, I went back and looked at Chuck's record, and I have seen guys who have, and we always like, oh man, he got knocked out so many times. I mean, he definitely got knocked out a few times, especially that Rich Franklin loss was really bad. And of course, the Rashad Evans one as well. But I've actually seen guys who have kept going on in the years ensuing that we didn't have nearly as much concern about, who took, I would say, a tantamount amount of damage. But that being said, this guy hasn't competed in, 7 years or something, a very long time. Has taken an extraordinary amount of damage. They're older. I understand that there's a market there. I understand there's a big market for Bellator. But if you're asking for me, I think commissions should be very hesitant, if not outright reluctant, if not outright refusing to license them, and promoters should think twice about hiring them. Obviously, they're legends. They're legends of the game, but that's exactly what they are, legends.
Especially when you consider the fact that I feel like Bellator is kind of getting over last year where they were booking, Ken versus Hoyce and Kimbo Dada, like sort of freak show fights. Of course, their next fight is headlined by Chael versus Wanderlei, and then we find out that they're supposed to have a press conference today in California, and Wanderlei did not make the trip from Brazil because he's sick. Are you starting to get concerned? And let me just say this, and I actually told this to one of the PR people. I thought it was a bad idea. You're going to make Wanderlei Silva, with everything going on, fly from Brazil to LA, then back to Brazil, and then to New York. Why just add another thing to his play? Like, is a press conference, 16 days before the fight now really going to move the needle all that much for you? It just doesn't seem like it was the juice was worth the squeeze. That being said, the fact that he didn't get on the plane, the fact that he didn't make it to LA, are you starting to get a little worried about Bellator's, big debut at MSG, their main event at least?
Yes, I am.
You are.
And and you and I talked about this previously because we went to that Bellator kickoff presser in MSG, and we were both like, man, this looks pretty good, but they're in New York State. And you just never, we know, how many times have we seen it where it was Rashad Evans and the paperwork didn't match, but he winds up getting licensed somewhere else without anything really changing? And I'm not saying necessarily in that case New York was in the wrong, but certainly in some ways they can be more strict, and and I think at a very minimum we could say they're very unpredictable relative to what we know from Texas or Nevada or New Jersey or California. And so you got a couple of older guys here. You got a couple of older guys with doping issues. You got a couple of older guys with a lot of miles on them. I think I asked Scott Coker about this. I was like, do you have any concerns about this? And he was like, look, they, the preliminary screenings, whatever those were, indicated that, if everyone sort of follows what they were supposed to be doing, there's nothing precluding them at this juncture from ultimately having this fight go forward. They got licenses. Okay, all right. But you know as well as I do, man. In MMA now, nothing is certain until you get right up into the walkout. And even then, it's not really all that certain. From weigh-in complications to sicknesses to travel to doping issues to injuries to age and you're doing all that in New York State, and those are your headliners. Yes, Fedor can pop into the headlining role if need be, but I'm a little bit nervous about it, to be honest. I think Chael will be just fine in the end, but Wanderlei, man, it's a weird one. He's a weird one.
Are you feeling a lot of buzz for that? Yesterday it seemed like they really tried to do a push online. It was one of the Twitter moments and things like that. Again, this is MSG. This is a big deal. It's pay-per-view. We talked about it, and we could talk about it again. But do you feel like this is trending in the right direction? Do you sense that this is a big deal coming up? Look, June is a packed month, and I'm going to ask you about what you consider to be the most interesting fight in a second this month. But do you feel like this is, Scott Coker just said it, the biggest event of the year, the biggest fight cards of the year, regardless of promotion?
It's certainly the best attempt a promoter has made at putting together a big event. UFC 213.
You feel like there's an excitement though from the people?
Not yet, But, it's still early, and it's Bellator. Bellator is not, Bellator can do big events, but they're not really in a position now where they can create fights so big that there's, weeks or months long anticipation for it, except inside that hardcore community. It's just not really possible. They're going to get stuff a little bit later. They're going to get a lot of walk-ups. They're going to get a lot of, people who tune in later off of Spike TV or something like that. But, I give them credit for everything they're going to do on Spike, having the Machida Strab Animal fight and Davis and Bader and everything like that. They're put together. They put a lot of effort together. I feel like once fight week comes, we'll feel it a little bit more, which is typical. I just mean, you've got Jones Cormier. We're already thinking about that, right? We're already dialed in. They don't have quite the roster or the status yet to have a contest like that. But I think in due time it'll be. I think by the time it's over, assuming that main event doesn't fall out or something happened to it, I think we'll ultimately look at this as a very successful event.
Okay, so let's end on this. June got off to a really good start. 212, those prelims were a lot of fun. Main event was fun, of course. Main card was pretty darn solid as well. And now we've got Derek Lewis versus Mark Hunt, which is just, if that's a boring fight, I don't know. I hate to say, there's no chance, but I feel pretty confident that this is going to be a fun fight, just given the two fighters involved. Also, there's an interesting fight like Derek Brunson versus Daniel Kelly. That's been a fun story. Daniel Kelly to watch unfold, especially as he gets up in age. So you've got this card in New Zealand, which isn't half bad. I think next week maybe the best Fight Pass main card in history. And I know that's not a long storied history, but there's been enough to where we can actually, when you talk about Holm and RDA moving up to 170 and Arlovsky being on the card and Colby Covington and the noise that he's made, Dong Young Kim, this is a pretty damn great Singapore main card. So you've got that, of course. Then you've got Bellator on June 24th. Of all these fights, it's a pretty good month. And June typically isn't the most, isn't the busiest month. July is usually that month. What do you like best? What's intriguing you right now?
There's a variety of responses you can go here. I think all the things you highlighted were great, but the one I'm going to go to is actually going to be on that Bellator show. I'm really looking forward to Larkin versus Lima for a couple of reasons. Well, I should say 3 reasons. Number one, Larkin is another guy who has made an unbelievable amount of progress over the years, and he left the UFC on a high note. Let's not forget that, beating Jorge Masvidal and steamrolling Neil Magny. Not easy to do. He's taken on Douglas Lima, a guy who has, I think, to me, there might be no more underrated fighter than Douglas Lima, and I truly mean that. Beating Paul Daly with ease in the same, not the exact same way that Rory did, but the same amount of difficulty, right? He is super talented. I think that fight is going to be incredible, and what I really like about it is you already know who the winner is going to fight, and you already know what's on the line. The winner fights Rory McDonald. Of course, it'll be a title fight because Larkin versus Lima is a title fight itself. This is great, great stuff. The fact that you know what's hanging in the wings, that these two guys come with very different scenarios, that they're very, very talented on a big show, I'm really looking forward to that.
Again, I'm excited for this month. I like them all. I adore the Derek Lewis-Mark Hunt fight, especially with Mark and his baggage and the lawsuit and, just kind of feels like he's playing with fire and Lewis's ascension, and he's so darn entertaining in and out of the cage. I can't wait for his post-fight interview if he wins. The guy is the total package right now. But to me, if I have to pick one fight where I feel like I need to be sitting down and watching this live, there's no more intriguing story than Holly Holm post Ronda Rousey. If she can't beat Bethe Correia, what do you do? And I feel like she's the favorite. I don't look at the lines, but I would be shocked if she's not the favorite. She can't beat Bethe Correia next Saturday morning in Singapore. I don't want to talk about the legacy and saying that the fight against Ronda was a sham, because it was what it was. It was one of the greatest performances ever by a challenger in a title fight. But holy smokes, there is a lot of pressure, I feel, on Holly Holm's shoulders to just go out there and steamroll through Bethe Correia, especially when you consider what Ronda Rousey did to Bethe Correia, in my opinion.
It's a great choice. I couldn't argue with that. With 3 losses in a row, can you imagine 4th? And each time the title, I'm not saying Misha's an easier fight than Ronda, but there is some kind of belief where it's like Ronda was the toughest challenge she had, and they've gotten progressively easier, and she's still performing progressively worse. And she got her blue belt in jiu-jitsu in this time. She's putting in the work. So, I won't say do or die, but pretty close for her. All
aligns with the Cyborg story. Look, if Holly Holm wins and Cyborg wins, I still really would love to see that fight.
Yes.
I still feel like that would be a fun fight at 145, so we'll see what happens there. All right, this has been a lot of fun. We've gone essentially an hour, I think, if my clock is correct, and we still left some things on the table, but we'll stay true to our 1 hour time limit or so here, and I feel like there haven't been any real technical issues. I mean, we'll see, maybe famous last words, but
yeah,
there's been enjoyed the.
You can't see. There's been a couple, but we'll work them out.
I was so happy. I was so proud of myself. I'll blame my internet connection for that.
The big takeaway here is that Chuck and Jeff dead weight. That's what I learned here today.
Dead weight. That is right. That is right. All right. The good news is we did the show. We hope you'll be able to watch it and enjoy it. The sort of bad news is we're actually off the next 2 weeks. Next week, our studio is actually going through a bit of a renovation. So that's good news down the line, because it's going to look a lot better, I think, in a couple of weeks. But that means we're off next week. And then the following week is Bellator in New York. We'll have a ton of content there. I know Luke will be there. I will be there. Other members of the team will be there. But we may not do a traditional MMA beat. But you'll still get the same usual stuff, MMA Hour, Luke's live chat, all that stuff and more throughout the week. So we won't leave you hanging necessarily. For now, we will say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you sticking around with us. We'll be back in a few weeks' time. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and then we'll see you next week for the MMA Hour and the live chat. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the fights.